Welcome to LollieTasking with ADHD. I am your host, Dr. Lollity, a multi-passionate mom of three, a physician, and an ADHD life coach because, like most of you amazing women listening, I have ADHD. Join me as we chat about how ADHD affects our lives and learn strategies to help us all thrive, not just survive, with ADHD so we can live the life we want while accomplishing all our goals. Let's get started. Hello, LollieTaskers. If you are new to the family, I am Dr. Lollity, a physician and ADHD trained life coach, and my goal is to help driven but yet easily distracted women like myself learn how to focus on what matters so we can reach our full potential. So, before we get started today, I want to give a shout out. I want to give a shout out to you all, my fellow listeners. I looked on our listening app, and we have over 6,000 people who have actually downloaded this podcast. Like, I was shocked. You know, I thank you for your comments. Um, I'm giving a shout out to either you listened for 1 minute or you listen to every episode. I'm giving you a shout out for your comments. I'm giving you a shout out for the private notes you send me. I'm giving you a shout out for subscribing to the podcast. I'm giving you a shout out for everything, for leaving a comment. You are the reason why I do this. We are at over 6,000 listeners. Yeah, I am very humbled and grateful, and I have decided that you have decided to follow me on this journey of exploring and learning and striving to be the best that we can, because even though we are driven, we are so easily distracted. And can you imagine if we can actually get to our full potential? Can you imagine everything we can do in this world? Can you imagine how amazing things will be? Can you imagine a life without Einstein? Can you imagine a life without, all this amazing ADHD people that have just made this world a better place? If only we're able to focus on our strength and work on what makes us unique and amazing. Like, the sky is like truly the limit for us. I am so grateful. I am so thankful. I am very emotional. Like, oh my gosh, thank you guys. So, but now that we're done celebrating, a toast to you. Go ahead and toast with your water or whatever you have with you. I'm very excited. Can you tell I'm excited? Yeah, I'm excited. Okay, so let's get back to our series. So, this month, if you're listening in the future, we are in the month of May, and we have decided to talk about some comorbidities associated with ADHD. Um, Last week we actually started on like why ADHD affects women, but this week we're going to talk about obsessive compulsive disorder. So obsessive compulsive disorder, like you guys know, well, you know or you don't know, is typically a disorder that a lot of people don't really know much about, but the people who have it really talk about how this can like totally like ruin their lives. And there are a lot of people that have talked about the association between OCD and ADHD, and it might not be what you think. So this podcast today is to just kind of talk about it a little bit, and also talk about how we may present and how if you have OCD, it may be why your ADHD have been maybe under control, if you may, or why you've been able to mask it as much, especially for high achieving women or driven women. So I thought this was a very, very important conversation. So let's start with definition. As you guys know, according to the American Psychiatric Association, they define obsessive compulsive disorders are typically characterized by the presence of recurrent, intrusive, and disturbing thoughts, aka obsessions, which often elicit anxiety or emotional stress, followed by repetitive stereotypic behavior or thoughts, aka compulsion, in order to neutralize the negative effects. Okay? And now let's talk about how they define ADHD, even though we know it's a little bit more than that. Attention deficit hyperactive disorder is characterized by a persistent pattern of inattention or hyperactivity and impulsivity. And this was also defined by the American Psychiatric Association. So, once you're listening to that definition, you can, I don't know if you were able to see this, but I was able to see that, ADHD um, is typically an externalizing disorder. And what does that mean? That means ADHD affect people in relationship to their environment, right? Like my ADHD, if I'm by myself and I'm not working, I'm not doing anything, I'm fine. Like I'm good. Like a lot of people with ADHD don't even realize they have ADHD, right? But it affects like our executive function or like the outward things that we do. Another thing that is big with ADHD is it's often associated with impulsiveness, aka increased risky behaviors. OCD, however, is more of an internalizing disorder in that the environment causes an inward effect. Okay, so obsessive and compulsive thoughts and behavior happens based on whatever is happening on the outside. So because of this, OCD people actually avoid risky behavior and they have a low rate of like seeking new things or even addiction. They don't have that impulsiveness that people with ADHD have. So that would be like one of the major difference between ADHD and OCD. Okay, so both actually have abnormal but opposite activity in the same brain pathway called the frontal striatal system. Um, so if ADHD was one on one end, OCD is on the other end. So in OCD, there's actually increase in the activity of the frontal striatal system, whereas in ADHD we find a decrease in that activity. Um, and the frontal striatal system actually is the area responsible for cognitive executive function. In that, some have even like suggested that it's not just OCD on one side and ADHD on one side, but it's actually a continuum, and they call this the compulsive impulsive continuum. You know, so it's a spectrum of behavioral impulsivity to behavioral compulsivity, right? They're definitely opposite. They both have similar effects though, and that's why it's so hard sometimes to understand that these are actually opposite diagnoses because their symptoms causes a external effect that affects planning, task switching, working memory, which also leads to underperformance in daily work of life or tasks or like outward things, right? But for different reasons. Um, and it's very surprising because when you think about it, when you look at all the studies, it said about 21% of children with ADHD also have OCD, whereas about 9% of adults also have OCD. Um, so, like I said, it's a spectrum. But here's the thing though, right? Like people are like, I don't understand how OCD also has executive issue. And the way we think about it is actually almost the same way I think about ADHD. The problem with OCD is because you have so much intrusive and compulsive uh, actions and thoughts, your brain memory is so overwhelmed. And, you know, and if anything is overwhelmed, it crashed. Just like if you have a overwhelmed computer, your processing speed goes down and then it eventually crashes. And when your brain crashes, that's your executive function, right? So that's why um, a lot of people with OCD also have those executive function issues that people with ADHD have. Okay, so I was reading something the other day, and there was a really important conversation, and I think it's something that I actually maybe agree with. It is like, could this be why high achieving women who do well with ADHD do so well? Because some of them may have this comorbidity of OCD. It may not be like severe OCD. Again, is a continuum, right? Could they be more in the ADHD? More ADHD, but a little bit of OCD spectrum, right? Like kind of like center left towards ADHD, right? Is that why? Because they have that perfectionistic tendencies, is what I like to call it. Because people who have true OCD, it can be paralyzing. It can be something that prevent them from leaving their house. It's not something that I truly wish on my enemy, right? Like OCD is not fun, but could they have some of those perfectionistic tendencies that people in OCD have, and that's why they do so well, right? So they when they actually looked at the research, they agree with what I was thinking. They said that more obsessive compulsive symptoms were actually correlated with better performance in test and executive function. Um, they said that this may be the reason why some people with ADHD um, exhibit OCD traits, right? Or I should say OC traits, not the disorder. Um, and if you see this, women, they're better organized. They will tell you, listen, I actually like freak out when things are not in the right place, right? And they're more attentive to details than typical ADHD people. They focus, they may have like this weird compulsion where like, okay, these has to be, let's say they have a test or whatever or a paper, that paper needs to be perfect. Or maybe they have a project due, right? They can't just get over the hump of like just do it and submit. That project has to be perfect, and they spend so much time on it that they end up missing the deadline. You see how that can correlate a little bit, right? So basically, in the light of deficits in attention and executive function is seen in both. So it's very, very easy for doctors and psychiatrists and coaches to potentially misdiagnose ADHD for OCD or OCD for ADHD. Um, and but here's the thing, though: if you have tried several stimulants and it's not working, and you have obsessive compulsive thoughts and behavior, you may want to consider that maybe it is OCD, because stimulant therapy actually makes OCD or obsessive compulsive thoughts and behaviors worse. And sometimes can even induce them instead of improving the symptoms in patients who have ADHD. In fact, this may explain why, like, a lot of times, like where people are like, oh, I took stimulants, it never worked for me, and then my doctor switched me to SSRI, and that happened to work for me. So I feel like in those people, they may have more OCD spectrum than ADHD spectrum. Um, and why do we even think that stimulant works in the first place? So stimulant tends to increase the activity of the frontal striatal system. And remember in the beginning, I told you like with ADHD, we have decrease in the frontal striatal system. And in OCD, we have increase in the frontal striatal system activity. So if you have a stimulant therapy that the mechanism of action is to increase that frontal striatal system, you can see why if you take a stimulant medicine, your OCD would be worse because your OCD already is because you have an increased frontal striatal system. And that's why in this situation, SSRI, which is serotonin inhibitors, receptor inhibitors are usually the ones that are prescribed for OCD. Okay. So, how do we tell them apart, right? It's not like I can go into your frontal striatal system in your brain and just look at it. Yeah, if only, right? I mean, we could, right? But it's expensive, it's MRI, it's like whatever. But what I could do is think about one of the most important thing that is very, very, very much associated with ADHD. That's impulsivity, right? The level of impulsivity and risk taking in people with OCD are very rare. They're not that impulsive, and they usually don't exhibit risk taking behavior. And they actually say majority of people, up to 75% of people diagnosed with ADHD, have impulsive slash hyperactive ADHD or the combined type ADHD. And just pure inattentive ADHD is actually very, very rare. Even people that are quote unquote called inattentive ADHD, when you actually talk to them, they will tell you how they have like some impulsivity that they have that in their brain or just in the way they take, or maybe even their life choices that they make. Okay. The second diagnostic marker is the ability to perform accurate and repetitive rituals, right? People with ADHD, one thing we hate doing is the mundane thing over and over and over. Like, it's really hard. We don't follow through. We're like, what the heck? Why do I have to keep doing this? So, having this ability to just do mundane thing could be your clue that, I mean, not just mundane thing, but like repetitive things could be your clue that maybe this is more ADHD than OCD. I mean, sorry, more OCD than ADHD. I think I said that backwards. Okay. So, in summary, deficits in the corticostriatal activity or system is responsible for cognitive control and performance in ADHD and OCD. However, there's a continuum between ADHD and OCD. It's actually not black and white. There's a lot more gray than black and white, straight in the middle. Okay, so it is very important to think about. Okay, if my ADHD is not working or my ADHD therapy is not working and I have a lot of um obsession and compulsion, maybe what I need to do is talk to my physician and see maybe what's going on with me is more OCD, which also affects your executive function. Okay, so I think that's where I really wanted to stop today. However, I thought it was very important to discuss something similar but not quite because people tend to confuse this a lot. So, as we talked about earlier, obsessive compulsive disorder are intrusive thoughts, compulsive actions, and thoughts, right? There is something else called obsessive compulsive personality disorder. While they have similar names, they're very different. In obsessive compulsive personality disorder, they have an intense and pervasive um, preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, mental control, interpersonal control. These people are usually rigid and stubborn. They love to do things on their own, and they may even have like behaviors that are essentially what people see as not flexible. Um, but they're very efficient. Okay, so OCD, OCPD is not the same thing as OCD, which is a very, very detrimental disorder. And that's why a lot of times I tend to tell people I have perfectionistic tendencies. And that kind of explains, like, okay, I'm not totally like OCD, but I'm more on the ADHD spectrum, but middle, right?
that explains it better. Uh, Another thing that people with OCPD do is that they see their thoughts as distressing, and sometimes people with OCD, sorry, see their thoughts as distressing and sometimes irrational, right? But people with OCPD actually don't see it that way. They see that they feel like they don't need to change, and other people are usually distressed by some of the symptoms or some of the ways that people with OCPD, which is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, act. So people see it, and it's usually not a cool thing. Okay, so again, some of the symptoms of OCPD is being overwhelming, need for order, strongly follow rules and regulation, extremely uncomfortable when things lack perfection. They might neglect personal relationship and focus on making some project more perfect, right? So that's really obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So I think that's it for today's episode of LollieTasking. I'm gonna put some sources in the show notes that way you can like learn more about it. But as we finish up today, on today's episode, we talked a lot about OCD and ADHD. And I want you to listen through, but while you're listening through, I want you to pick one thing that you're going to work on this week. Okay? And with that being said, I conclude with our quote. So I am going to end with this quote, which is never trust your fear, they don't know your strength. So always trust yourself. Always do the things that even like if you have this intrusive thought, always trust yourself that you can overcome it. Because if you don't trust yourself, it's really hard for other people to help you overcome it. And if you feel like you have OCD, please reach out to your primary physician or psychiatrist that can help you with diagnosis and possible treatment if you truly do have OCD. Okay, so thank you for hanging out with me today. And I hope you had an amazing time. And I wish you will stay intentional ahead this week. I also want you to just pick one thing that was a haha moment for you, one thing that you're going to work on. Just one thing, okay? So don't be a stranger. If you have any questions or want to talk about um, anything else extensively or want me to talk about it, send me a message. I would be glad to. Okay. Don't forget to follow us on IG at LollieTasker or email us at hello@LollieTasking.com and leave a review. Leave a review. You might just get a shout out on the next episode. So, till next time, remember you can do it too with some planning, a little bit of balance, and a dash of determination. This is multitasking with ADHD.
Thanks for hanging out with us on another episode of LollieTasking with ADHD. If you like what you've heard today, I would love for you to click the subscribe button, rate, and leave a great review, in addition to sharing with your friends. Your review allows visibility and also allows other amazing women to find this podcast. Also, if you have any questions or topics you would like for us to discuss, please contact me via direct message on Instagram at LollieTasker or email us at hello@LollieTasking.com. Till next time, this is LollieTasking with ADHD.